I want you to listen very carefully to the sound in the background. That isn't a bear. It isn't a wolf. And it certainly isn't the wind. That is the sound of 12-year-old Simon Holloway recording on a dictaphone that was running out of battery, hiding inside a hollowed-out log in the Blackwood Ridge wilderness. He had been missing for 22 days. When search and rescue finally found him, he wasn't crying for his mother. He wasn't asking for food. He was clutching a jagged piece of obsidian glass, shaking back and forth, whispering one sentence over and over again. The king requires a crown. We all know the story of Lord of the Flies. Fiction teaches us that society is a thin veneer, and beneath it, we are all savages. But what if I told you that the most terrifying thing about isolation isn't that we turn on each other? What if the terrifying part is what happens when we stop being individuals and become something else entirely? This is the story of the Blackwood Experiment. And be warned, unlike the book, there is no happy ending. Let's go back to the summer of 1999. The Horizon Wilderness Program was marketed as a last-ditch solution for the sons of the wealthy elite. These were kids who had been kicked out of boarding schools for arson, violence, or extreme truancy. The program was simple. Take 10 troubled boys, drop them into a remote sector of the Canadian wilderness with 2 highly trained ex-military counselors, and force them to learn survival skills. It was supposed to break them down and build them back up. The group was diverse in their dysfunction. You had Julian, the oldest at 15, athletic, charismatic, but with a cruel streak a mile wide. He was there because he broke a classmate's arm over a game of cards. Then was Toby, the youngest, small, asthmatic, obsessed with biology and insects. He was the outcast. And in the middle, our narrator for this nightmare, Elias. Elias was there because he stopped speaking. He wasn't mute, he chose not to participate in the world anymore. But Elias kept a journal. And it's through this water-damaged, mud-stained notebook that we know exactly how hell on earth began. On July 14th, the bus dropped them off at the trailhead. The counselors, a gruff man named Miller, and his assistant, Banks, marched the boys 6 miles into the dense green. Elias writes in his first entry, "The trees here don't sway. They stand still like they're holding their breath." Miller says, "We're here to become men. But looking at the shadows stretching over the camp, I feel like we're here to be eaten." The campsite was a small clearing near a jagged cliff face the locals called the Devil's Tooth. For the first 3 days, things were normal. Miller barked orders. They learned to tie knots. They complained about the mosquitoes. It was miserable, but it was safe. But on the morning of the 4th day, the boys woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like pressure in their ears. They unzipped their tents. The sun was high. Miller's tent was slashed open from the inside. Bank's sleeping bag was gone. There were no footprints leading away from the camp, just dragged earth, as if something heavy had been pulled into the brush. And the radio, the only link to the outside world, was smashed, not dropped, smashed. A heavy rock sat in the center of the shattered plastic like a tombstone. Panic is a funny thing. We expect screaming. We expect chaos. But according to Elias's journal, the first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. "Where did they go?" Toby asked, clutching his inhaler. "Maybe it's a test," Julian said. He was standing by the fire pit holding Miller's hunting knife. He had found it in the dirt. "Yeah, it's a test. They want to see if we crack." Julian took charge immediately. It made sense. He was the strongest. He held the knife. In the absence of authority, the person holding the weapon becomes the law. He organized a search party. They spent hours combing the perimeter. They found nothing. No blood, no struggle marks, just the endless, suffocating wall of pine trees. That night, the atmosphere shifted. Without the adults, the fire felt smaller. The darkness felt closer. Elias wrote, "Julian is telling ghost stories to scare the younger ones, but he keeps looking over his shoulder. The woods are making noises I've never heard before. Not crickets. It sounds like clicking. Like wet tongues clicking against teeth. Hundreds of them." By day 6, the food supplies were already being rationed. And this is where the psychological split began. In Lord of the Flies, the split is between order and chaos, the conch and the spear. But here, the split was between reality and the hive. Toby, the biology nerd, tried to explain that they needed to conserve energy. He wanted to build a signal fire on the Devil's Tooth. He was logical. He was the anchor to the real world. But Julian was changing. He stopped wearing his shirt. He started painting his face with mud and crushed berries. "Not for camouflage," he said. "So the woods know I'm part of them." Julian claimed he had a dream. He said the counselors didn't leave. They were taken because they didn't respect the land. "We have to show we aren't like them," Julian told the group around the dying fire. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "We have to show we belong." This is the moment the cult was born. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about appeasement. A week passes. The group has fractured. 3 boys stayed with Toby and Elias near the original camp. They were trying to keep the routine, washing clothes, gathering wood. The other 5 went with Julian. Julian moved his group deeper into the woods, near a stagnant black pond. Elias visited them once to try and trade for batteries. What he saw terrified him. Julian's group wasn't speaking English anymore. They had developed a shorthand, grunts, whistles, and hand signals. They moved low to the ground, hunched over. But the most disturbing part, the shrine. In the center of their camp, Julian had built a structure. It was a tripod of thick branches bound together with shoelaces. Hanging from the center was the head of a deer.
But it wasn't a fresh kill. It was rotting, covered in maggots. And underneath it, Sitting in a perfect circle of stones were the boy's possessions: a Game Boy, a watch, a wallet. "Why?" Elias asked Julian. Julian didn't look at him. He was staring at the deer head, swaying in the breeze. "The king is hungry," Julian whispered. "Metal makes him sick. Plastic makes him sick. We give it back." Elias tried to convince them to come back to the main camp. He told them a plane might see them if they stayed in the open. But Julian just laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, barking sound. "No planes come here, Elias. The sky is closed." Elias ran back to Toby. He wrote in his journal that night with a shaking hand, "They aren't my friends anymore. Their eyes are empty. It's like something scooped them out and poured black water inside. And the smell, they smell like copper and wet earth. The horror here builds not from violence, but from the uncanny. These were kids from the suburbs. They liked video games and pizza. Within 10 days, they had regressed thousands of years. Or maybe they hadn't regressed. Maybe they had evolved into something the forest wanted them to be. Then the clicking started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from outside Elias's tent. It was night 12 when the violence started. Toby was sick. His asthma was flaring up, and he was out of medication. He was wheezing, a loud, rasping sound that echoed in the silent camp. Elias was trying to comfort him when the hunters, Julian's group, descended. They didn't attack with weapons. They threw rocks, heavy, river-smooth stones. They pelted the tents. "Shut him up!" Julian screamed from the darkness. "The noise! The king hates the noise!" Elias shouted back, "He can't help it! He's sick!" "Then he is weak, and the weak feed the soil." The psychological break was complete. To Julian, Toby wasn't a boy anymore. He was a noise. He was a disturbance in the frequency of the forest. The attack lasted all night. Every time Toby coughed, a rock would fly out of the dark, thudding against the canvas. The next morning, Elias woke up to find Toby gone. There was no struggle, no blood, just a trail of drag marks leading toward the Devil's Tooth Cliff. Elias woke the other two rational boys, Sam and Marcus. They grabbed makeshift spears, sharpened sticks, and followed the trail. The dread in Elias's writing here is palpable. I don't want to find him. I pray we don't find him, because if we do, I know he won't be Toby anymore. They tracked the drag marks to the edge of a ravine. Down below, about 30 feet, was a small ledge, and there was Toby. He wasn't dead. He was tied to a tree, gagged with dirty cloth, but he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were the hunters. They were swaying back and forth, chanting a low, buzzing hum. And in front of Toby stood Julian. Julian was holding a large rock with both hands. He raised it high above his head. Elias screamed, "No!" He scrambled down the slope, sliding on loose shale. The hunters looked up. They didn't look surprised. They looked hungry. Julian lowered the rock slowly. He smiled. "The witnesses have arrived. Now the ceremony can begin." This wasn't savagery. This was ritual. Julian believed that the sickness, the asthma, the weakness had to be crushed out of the group to survive. Elias realized, with horror, that they weren't going to kill Toby because they hated him. They were going to kill him to cure the forest of his noise. The confrontation was brutal. Elias, Sam, and Marcus charged the circle. It was children fighting children, but with the ferocity of wild dogs, biting, scratching, gouging eyes. Elias managed to tackle Julian. He describes the moment in vivid detail. His skin was cold, not cool, cold like a reptile. And his eyes, his pupils were different. They weren't round. They were blown out, black voids. In the chaos, Sam managed to cut Toby loose. "Run!" Elias screamed. The four of them scrambled back up the ravine. The hunters didn't chase them. They just stood there, watching. Julian wiped blood from his lip and started that clicking sound again. Click, click, click. And then the forest answered. From the canopy above, hundreds of birds took flight at once. The noise was deafening. Elias and his group retreated to the highest point they could find, a rocky outcrop halfway up the Devil's Tooth. It was defensible, but they had no food, no water, and Toby was in bad shape. That night, the siege began. But the hunters didn't attack with spears. They used psychological warfare. They surrounded the rock base. They mimicked the voices of the boys' parents. Imagine sitting in the pitch black, starving, and hearing your mother's voice calling your name from the bushes. "Elias, dinner is ready. Elias, come home." But the voice is wrong. It's distorted. It's coming from the throat of a 15-year-old boy who has lost his mind. Elias writes, "I covered my ears. I hummed, but I could still hear them. They know our names. They know what hurts us. Julian told them he's turning our memories into weapons." On the third day of the siege, the king revealed himself. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. Julian climbed a nearby tree, level with their rock shelf. He was wearing the rotting deer head like a mask. The maggots fell from it onto his shoulders. He spoke, but the voice sounded doubled, like two people speaking at once. "The forest is a body."
"The forest is a body," Julian said, "and you are the virus. We have to purge the virus. He threw something onto the rock shelf. It was Miller's ID badge, covered in dried blood. We found him, Julian said. He was hiding in the earth. We helped him become part of the roots. You are next. This is the terrifying twist. The counselors hadn't just left. They had been hunted down days ago. The boys weren't alone because of an accident. They were alone because the hunters had started their work the moment they arrived. The savage instinct was there before the camp even started. The end came not with a bang, but with a mechanical roar. A Forestry Service helicopter doing a routine survey of the fire lines spotted the smoke. Not a signal fire. Julian had set the woods on fire to smoke Elias out. The pilot saw the boys on the rock. He saw the flames licking up the side of the cliff. He radioed for evac. When the rescue team descended, they expected lost hikers. What they found was a war zone. Elias, Sam, and Marcus were pulled into the chopper, weeping, emaciated, covered in soot. But when the rescue team went down to get the others, the hunters were gone. They vanished into the smoke. The authorities searched for weeks. They brought in dogs. They brought in thermal imaging. They found Julian 3 weeks later. He was naked, curled up inside the hollow trunk of a massive oak tree. He was dehydrated, near death. When they pulled him out, he didn't fight. He just smiled. But here is the kicker. Here is the part that keeps me up at night. They never found the other 4 hunters. 4 boys vanished. No bodies, no bones, no clothing. It was as if the forest simply opened up and swallowed them whole. Elias is in his 30s now. He lives in a facility in Ohio. He doesn't go outside. He keeps the blinds drawn. He allowed his journal to be published under a pseudonym, which is how we have this story. But the last page of the journal, the page written after he was rescued, contains a chilling observation. Elias wrote, "They say Julian is locked up. They say he's medicated. But I know the truth. Sometimes, when the AC vents in my room hum at a certain frequency, I can hear it. I hear the clicking. And last night, I found a smooth river stone under my pillow. I've been in this room for 10 years. I didn't put it there. Julian isn't locked up. Or if he is, he isn't the one who was in charge. The king is still out there, and the king requires a crown." The Sylvan incident, as it was legally known, was ruled a tragic case of mass hysteria induced by starvation and exposure. The official report says the missing boys succumbed to the elements and were likely eaten by wildlife. But looking at the facts, the mimicry, the synchronized behavior, the impossible disappearance, one has to wonder, did those boys lose their humanity? Or did they find something ancient in those woods? Something that had been waiting a very long time for a new tribe. Next time you go camping and you hear the wind whistle through the trees, listen closely. If it sounds like a whistle, you're fine. But if it sounds like a click, don't run. It's already too late. Sleep well.